Let's continue our ArcGIS Server talk series. Today we're going to talk about clusters. Good morning, y'all. This is Hussein Nasser from iGeometry Podcast, and welcome to another ArcGIS Server talk. It's 6:30 in the morning. Beautiful morning here, Redlands, California. Today we will discuss actually a very underrated feature in ArcGIS Server. It's called clusters. Clustering, it's a very overloaded term, but in general means to group. It's kind of a grouping of different assets or objects together. But in the context of ArcGIS Server, what it means is I can create a cluster and I can put in a given server site multiple machine in a given cluster. So what's the benefits of that? So by default, let's go back, right? Let's go back to episode 2 where we discussed server site creation, and we created like a site that has multiple machines. When we join a machine to a site, what we get by default, if we don't have any clusters, we get one cluster, one big cluster called default, right? And all machines, all right, in this site will be joined to that cluster, right? To the default cluster. So you, as a user, as an admin, you have an option to create a different cluster in the same site, right? So we're just having one site here. Let's say this site has machine A and machine B, as we discussed earlier. And let's say I created a new machine and I installed ArcGIS Server. I fired up port 6080 and I'm asked to join a machine, right? So yeah, I join a machine. I put one of those machines, B or A, just to pull up, just enough to pull up the configuration so I can know which site they live in. And then I pull that, and then just like that, I will be joined. Machine C will be joined to that site. But what we didn't explain is A, B, C all live in the same cluster, which is called default under machine, under site, under this server site. So I can, for instance, create a new cluster and say this cluster will be for long-running processes, right? Processes that machines that are heavy duty and they have a good resources. They have large memory footprint. They have a lot of CPU, a lot of CPUs, a lot of CPU cores. And then I'm gonna dedicate this cluster for heavy operations, things like running GP tools, running asynchronous heavy operations like tracing and analytics and maybe utility network stuff, right? Very heavy stuff, right? And I'm gonna dedicate the cluster default to run the usual short-lived requests like zoom in, pans, queries in general, maybe edits, right? I just wanted to do the simple things that takes like around 300 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds to execute in these clusters. They are cheaper machines. They're not high-class machines, but they just do the job. So I'm gonna put like 5 machines in this cluster default, and then the other cluster, which is I called it, what did we call it? GP processing, high processing, right? This cluster, and then let's have now default cluster have A, B, and C. It's very hard to do on a podcast, huh? Yeah. So I have in a server side, I have 3 machines in default cluster, A, B, and C. They are regular machines, a desktop machine. And now let's say I created a new cluster, call it geoprocessing cluster. or very high load cluster. And then now I'm going to add a new machine D, which happens to be a very high end server class machine, and I'm gonna join it. I install ArcGIS Server, fired up 6080, and I'm asked to, oh, do you want to create a new site? Do you want to join? I want to join. Now I'm going to put the port, which is 6080, of either of these machines, A, B, and C, and I'll be prompted this time. It says, hey, by the way, do you want to add this machine to the default cluster? I see that this site has multiple clusters. Do you want to put it in the default cluster or the geoprocessing cluster? And no, machine D goes to the geoprocessing cluster. And then you hit join. So that's really pretty cool. So now you can also go to sites on the server manager and play with that. It says, oh, you know what? Machine C is actually a pretty good machine. I don't need it to be in default cluster. Let me move it to the geoprocessing cluster. You can do that. You can start playing with the clusters and move machines around. So now, how can I utilize that? This will be a discussion in the next episode. How can I have my service run in a cluster versus another? Let's talk about that in the next episode. You guys have a great day. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.